Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. It's the isolation that destroys us. The solution is in community. Today on the podcast, we have two of my favorite people, Glenn Martin and Richard Bronson, talking about how they each reinvented themselves after prison. They are both incredibly generous and reveal their struggles, disappointments, and frailties, as well as their successes and service in helping others. Glenn talks about his journey from an armed robber to prison to nonprofit executive to founding Just Leadership USA to entrepreneur, executive coach, and investor in gem trainers and gem real estate. Richard discusses his Wall Street life, including at Straton Oakmont, made famous in the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, prison, and then founding two companies to lift up returning citizens, 70millionjobs.com and his latest, Commissary Club. So coming up, Glenn Martin and Richard Bronson, Reinventing Yourself After Prison on White Collar Week. I hope you will join us. Hello, and welcome to White Collar Week, a podcast sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries, the world's first ministry serving the white-collar justice community. I'm Jeff Grant, co-founder and your host. I served almost 14 months in a federal prison for a white-collar crime I committed when I was a lawyer. So I know that it's the isolation that kills us, and the solution is in community. So let's get started. Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. We have a very special podcast today. We have two of my buddies, both of whom I admire tremendously. We have Glenn Martin and we have Richard Bronson. The topic today is reinventing ourselves after prison. And these two guys have reinvented themselves a bunch of times. And very, very interesting stories. I almost don't have to introduce them, but I will. Glenn Martin went from prison and had a bunch of different stops, which he'll talk about. But most notably, he was vice president of development for Fortune Society. Then he founded Just Leadership USA, a very high profile situation. And then he founded Gem Trainers and Gem Real Estate. And he is now doing workshops for people who want to get into real estate. So we'll allow Glenn some time to talk about all that, which is super exciting. And Richard has an incredible tale to tell, his kind of Wolf of Wall Street tale to founding 70millionjobs.com. And his new venture is Commissary Club, which is kind of a AARP maybe for the criminal justice world, which is a way to talk about it. But I'll let him talk about it more. So Glenn, Richard, welcome to White Collar Week. It's so good to see the both of you.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't we just kind of go into a little bit of our backgrounds, because we all have justice-impacted backgrounds. How's that for a nice way to put it? And I think we should just set the tone for people who may not know us. So Glenn, why don't we start with you? Because we've been friends for a long time. And you can kind of lead us from where you were, and then try to get us to at least your Fortune Society days.
Yeah, cool. Thanks again for the invite. I'm super excited to be back on the show and to be here with my good friend Richard, who every time I look at him, he reminds me of Korean barbecue. It's a personal story between the two of us, but we get to enjoy some great food whenever I head out to the West Coast to hang out with him. So yeah, going back now for me, I came out of prison 20 years ago at this point. So we're going back about 26 years just to start the story, if you will. And got incarcerated, armed robbery, multiple armed robberies, jewelry stores at the time, bunch of co-defendants, 6-7 co-defendants. Ended up hanging out at Rikers for a really long time, waiting to try to get a decent plea, if you will. Get a plea, head upstate, and like many people go to prison, I'll be honest, like I was just chomping at the bit to get the hell back out and get back in the streets and see if I could be better at what I was doing before. And a correction counselor said to me, you should go to college. And no one had ever said that to me before. And I end up at a college way upstate New York, 10 hours away from home, at Attica, and then in the facility next door to Attica, Wyoming. And I earned a quality 2-year liberal arts degree. And you can imagine that was just a game changer for me. Not just the degree itself, the credential, but the journey, like anyone else's educational journey. And so come out, looking for a job just like anyone else with a record, having a difficult time. Ultimately end up at a reentry organization, and a formerly incarcerated guy, George Lino, can't believe I remember his name 20 years ago, decides he's going to take me under his wing. And it was good to see another formerly incarcerated person who had actually made it, saying, I'm going to help you make it. And he got me my first gig at a place called the Legal Action Center, nonprofit, public interest law firm. I'm answering the phones at the front desk. I'm $83,000 in debt, fines, fees, restitution. And I'm making, I think it was 16 grand a year at the time. But it was a place with opportunity. And so I grew there, went through 5 different positions, stayed there long enough to realize that if I wasn't going to go to law school, I probably needed to move on. Lasted about 6.5 years, and then moved on to the Fortune Society. And I really cut my teeth on how to build organizations there, how to do fundraising, how to do marketing, communications, a set of skills that would just catapult my career. And, the one thing I want your viewers to hear before I pass it back to you is, I can tell this story and make it sound like it was a total upward trajectory, but it wasn't. Like everything else in life, it's a real roller coaster. Anyone who tells you there's a straight line between walking out of prison and being successful is not telling the truth. And I hope in this interview we get into some of that. But I'll pass it back over now.
Yeah, for sure. I want this to definitely be about our the difficulties and the failures and successes and how it's all interwoven. And Glenn, I just want to tell you that when I went out last year to LA to visit Richard, we had vegan food. So there's something about this, that you're the super healthy guy eating the Korean barbecue, and I'm the fat guy eating vegan with him. I can't figure that one out.
Yeah, no, we had enough beef that day to kill a farm full of cows. That's for sure.
So, Richard, why don't you give us some background and kind of lead us up to 70 million jobs, and then we can kind of get into what we've been doing in the last 4 or 5 years.
Sure. First, let me state categorically for the record, I much prefer Korean barbecue to vegan. So I just want you to know that. And that's no reflection on the company, because I would be proud to eat either with either of you. So I want, like Glenn said, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting us. And I know, speaking for Glenn, I get asked all the time, about advice for people who are returning citizens, and, very often they're people who have had some measure of success in their pasts and a certain lifestyle they're accustomed to, and what their options may be. And, I certainly look forward to sharing at least my thoughts on that. But I'm from New York. I currently live in Los Angeles, where my company is based. I used to work on Wall Street back in the 80s when, that was the greed is good era. I worked at a couple of big investment banking firms, and I did very well there. And then I left there to go work at this small little brokerage firm on Long Island called Straton Oakmont. And that is the firm that was portrayed in Scorsese's Wolf of Wall Street movie. And actually, I hung out with Jordan Belfort about 2 months ago on several occasions. He's also in LA. But I became a partner there, and that was certainly as crazy as you could imagine. If you've seen the movie, it was fueled by, young people making a lot of money easily, and taking a lot of drugs along the way, and breaking the law all the time. I left working at Stratton to move down to Florida, where I, along with another guy, founded our own financial services firm. And in short order, we grew that business into a $100 million company. We had like 500 employees around the country. So, we were very much in cahoots with our friends at Stratton, which is to say we too were breaking the law. I made really a great deal of money, and I led a sort of, incredible life of, Ferraris and private jets and gambling trips, where I'd win or lose $1 million in a weekend, and lots of drugs. It's amazing that I'm alive, because I discovered that doing 3 shots of vodka quickly and then taking 2 Quaaludes and hopping behind the wheel of a Ferrari, is it's as much excitement as anybody can ever undertake. And it's truly amazing that I wasn't a casualty of those drug wars. But as I knew it would happen, I was, one day the feds came knocking on my door, and, they said, "Richard, we need to talk." And those are the words, when they showed me, they pulled up their jacket and showed the badges around their belts and the pistol at their side. I long awaited that. I knew it was coming. And in a way, I almost was happy that finally it was coming, because like anything, the anticipation is often a lot scarier than the reality. And certainly that was true for me going to prison. They offered me the opportunity to help them bring cases against other people I knew and to wear a wire, and I rejected that. I was already ashamed of stuff that I had done. I wasn't going to, add to that by ruining other people's lives to save my own ass. So I was indicted and convicted. And luckily, my partner and I had paid everybody back prior to our indictment, partly because we felt guilty and partly because we knew we were going to get into trouble, and that would probably at least mitigate, the whole situation. Sure. If we can point to the fact that there were no actual losses incurred at the end of the day. But nonetheless, we were guilty. Excuse me. And for the record, just like my friend Glenn, and I don't know if you've had this experience, you go into prison and everybody there is innocent. There's nobody in prison who will admit to the fact that they committed a crime. I am here to say, and I've heard Glenn tell me his stories, and he's as honest as I am, whereby, and you too, Joel, I've heard yours too, I was guilty and I broke the law, and I broke the law because I was greedy and impatient and stupid, and I have no other excuses than that. So, I was really ashamed, and I was sent to the prison, and I was hoping that going to prison was going to make me relieved of my shame, and I'd find atonement. And for me, it hasn't done that. I still wait, you're talking about how we remain impacted. I wake up every morning with this, and again, I've done my time, I paid everybody back, and then for me, it's 30 years later. And I still wake up every morning with this emptiness in my gut of, as I'm reminded of decisions I made that there's really nothing I can do about. But in any event, I'm sorry to take so long.
Oh, you're doing great.
But truly, I love to hear myself talk. I mean, that's my excuse. I got out of prison, and I wasted several years trying to figure out what to do with myself. And I had no clue where I belonged, who I was. Am I a successful person? Am I a home run hitter? Or am I letting my ego again get in the way of me, restarting? And I have, I'm sure, like the both of you, we have thoughts on that. I eventually, like Glenn, found a home working at a nonprofit organization in the reentry space called Defy Ventures. And for me, it was incredibly therapeutic for me to do it. I eventually came to feel like we really weren't having a hell of a lot of impact, but nonetheless, it was really good for my soul. And it gave me a direction for the rest of my life, which, we can talk about afterwards if you'd like. It informs what I do today, certainly. But, it's much better, sleeping these days than it used to be, and not worrying about hearing clicks on my phone, because people were listening in and all kinds of other weirdness, so, not breaking the law is advised. That's my first advice to people. Don't do it again.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. If it hurts when you do it, then don't do it.
Yeah, I forgot. I'm glad you reminded me, because I forgot that we had first spoken when you were at Defy Ventures, and there was I don't want to get into any of the drama over at Defy, but I'm glad that you mentioned trauma, because I think that that's a very important thing to talk about. People get home and they can't even they don't even know what they don't know. I was lost, and I think it's really easy for someone who's coming out to look at people who are doing interesting or exciting things or have rebuilt their life somewhat, and they want to leap there. How do I be a Glenn Martin, or how do I be a Richard Bronson? But the truth is that I tell everyone the same thing, is that you're in trauma you don't even know. You need to let this work out a little bit. So why don't you each tell me a little bit about that trauma and how much it informed your decision making, and then what you tell other people about that space in the, say, let's call it 2 to 3 years when you first get home. Glenn?
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you. I got to be honest. It took me 17 years to realize how much trauma I was carrying around. Mm-hmm. I have been in therapy every week for the last 2.5 years or so, addressing those issues. And it's been liberating. It's been more liberating, honestly, than walking out of that prison, believe it or not. People see me today without me opening my mouth, whether they see me, my presence on social media, or whether they know me personally. The thing that I hear the most over the last 2.5 years is, you seem free, which is strange, because I've been technically free for 20 years now. But over the last 2.5 years, people are saying you seem free a lot more frequently. And what I didn't realize until a couple of years ago, when things crashed and burned, which is a theme in my life. My life's a bit of a roller coaster. I'm sure everyone's is, except mine seems to go up higher and shoot back down a lot lower than everyone else's. But I didn't realize that I was still finding ways to sort of ignore some of the trauma that I had experienced as a young person. And I think I was doing it first by the risk that I was engaging in the streets. I mean, sticking up jewelry stores, you talk about a rush, right? For better or for worse, it's a pretty scary thing. And I've done about 200 plus robberies when I was younger, and go to prison, earn a college degree, come out, and in some ways replace that appetite for risk with a professional version of it. I mean, I hit the ground running in nonprofit. I think I had 15 positions in 17 years, built not just an organization, but multiple multi-million-dollar projects along the way, raised over 17 years, maybe $100 million, definitely 40 plus million when I got to Just Leadership, and really was just living off the adrenaline that came from that high, and everything else that comes with it that, I actually have some regrets about now, to be quite honest. I think, nonprofits have become very professionalized, very institutionalized. And if you're good at it, people engage in heroism. Like, they really hold you up and put you on a pedestal. And you end up on, doing CNN and MSNBC and on stages all across the country and getting paid more money, for one speech than I get paid in a quarter of a year when I was a young person. And that stuff, even though I tried to manage it and I really thought I was managing it, I can see now, looking back, how all I was doing was really using much of that to shield myself from the trauma that I hadn't addressed around family issues with women, you name it, throughout my life. And so there were some behaviors that just continued to stay with me as I was building my career. And just like when Richard talked about, I knew that day was coming. You sort of know your day is coming, right? Like, if you have like this double life going on, or you have this other thread of things happening, you sort of know, like, if you just, anyone who gambles knows that eventually the house is going to win. And so I knew the house was going to win. The question was just when and how. And so what's great is that now I'm rebuilding my life yet again. And I've built this great consulting business. I'm doing much better than I've done even running nonprofits. And then on top of that, once I felt like that was off the ground and solid, and I had a few people working for me, got into real estate. And similarly there, I built a multi-million-dollar portfolio in less than 30 months. Except I would argue that the foundation of my two businesses now is much more healthier than I've ever built on top of in my entire life. And, I wish you could take wisdom and put it in a bottle and package it and sell it to young people. But I got to admit, part of it is the experience, the age, you name it. It really has taught me the importance of how you behave when no one's watching being equally important, or arguably much more so important than when people are watching. And, we can dig into that, but trauma definitely is something I avoided for way too long. And I would urge anyone walking out of the criminal justice system to be as vulnerable as possible, vulnerable with themselves, vulnerable with others, create spaces for other people to get in and give them feedback, healthy feedback. It's something I didn't do. And it's something that people allowed me to get away with because I showed up so well in other places. And it's the last thing I'll say, and I'll stop, is that you have a lot of people come out of prison that come out with a set of skills that just propel them to the front of the line, right? Whether it's the charismatic front of the room person, whether it's like me, you learn how to fundraise, or you're a public speaker, or you name it. And the problem with being that person is that you get away with all the other BS in the background, right? People just don't ask those questions because they want to romanticize the thing about you they love the most. And so those are the people I would urge to really pay closer attention to themselves and their decisions that they're making when no one's watching.
I think that's a great point. One of the things I learned in recovery was that every opportunity, everything that comes along, is an opportunity to work on my character and become closer to God. So that's kind of the model I use now, because I really don't know what's going to work out. I don't know what's going to make money, or I don't know what's going to ultimately be successful. But if I'm improving myself intentionally along the way and becoming more the person who I believe God intended me to be, then things are going to be better than they were before. I just may not be able to define that. I may not know what that is going in.
Yeah, I should have said I have two therapists. God is the other one. And, they say no one's an atheist in a foxhole. The truth is I was very much, or at least I thought I was an atheist when I was locked up. And unfortunately, I left the notion of God right there in that prison. I was so harmed by the experience. And it took me 17 years to work my way back.
Yeah.
But yeah, God is my other therapist.
Richard, I don't know if I told you this when we had lunch, but I was in Allenwood Low with Mark Hanna.
Yeah, you did mention that.
Yeah, and I know Matthew McConaughey played him in the Wolf of Wall Street movie, but there's no way that Matthew McConaughey could have been as wild and weird and wild and as crazy as Mark Hanna really was.
Yeah, he's an odd one. He really was. He extricated himself very early on from the whole thing. Glenn said so many things that to me were really wise, and every time he started a new sentence, I said, "Yeah, that's where I'm going to start from," and then I go, "No, that's the point that I want to underline," and whatever. And which brings me to a whole other point, and that is, I work with people who have been incarcerated, and some for a very long time, 30, 35 years. For a lot of people, the whole incarceration experience makes them very wise. And, there's so much time that you are left, to be introspective, and just to think and consider your life and how things happened. There's a Yiddish expression that goes something like, man plans and God laughs. and I never, ever, ever, people go, well, how did you end up doing it? I go, I have no idea. I'm a risk taker, which I think a lot of people who are successful crooks are comfortable with taking risks. We are home run hitters, or we aspire to be. We're willing to risk striking out to hit the long ball. But more than anything else in prison, I saw that there were a lot of people who really had game, who really were incredibly bright and entrepreneurial, had successful criminal enterprises, and that had they been born into a different, world, they would have been Mark Zuckerberg. They would have gone to school at Stanford, and led a very, very different life. I got out, and I mean, in a sense, I feel like and I don't feel comfortable complaining. And for my generation, I wasn't brought up that way. That's not what a man does. Tough it out, keep your mouth shut. Life doesn't owe you a living. My father used to say to me.
I remember that one.
So my expectations of a soft, easy life never ever. So I'm never surprised when things go wrong. I'm kind of waiting for them. It's sad in a way, But I study Buddhism, and I am very, very, very attuned to my karma. And I have a concern that I incurred plenty of bad karma, and that's part of, what motivates me to do the right thing. I want to go to heaven, if not in this lifetime, the next. And, I have the opportunity to sort of change my karma by leading, a much more righteous life. I discovered that if you're honest with people, and if you really come to situations primarily with a open, loving heart, and you said something like that, Jeff, that inevitably, in ways you don't expect, it'll come out pretty good. And just be resolute in bringing that kind of energy to things. But Glenn was talking about, after 17 years, in therapy, and that he feels lighter, or people see him that way, and freer as a result. I've always identified the ego in me and in anybody is really the root cause of all the problems we have.
Sure.
And, when I let my ego just sort of go and, detach myself from it, things seem to be a whole lot better. But I can't say I'm anywhere near where I wish I were in that regard. I don't think I'm that much lighter now. I'm much more honest, and I have much less larceny in my blood, primarily because it would be embarrassing for me to get in and out of a Ferrari. And supermodels don't want to go out with a guy who's 66 years old.
They don't?
They don't, Jeff. So stop trying, for God's
sake. Oh, my God.
Yeah. So, it's kind of, but do I wish I could, on a certain respect, I loved the life. I loved that, gangster life I led, and it was a lot of fun. And, but then again, I needed to take drugs to be able to fall asleep because I was so ashamed.
Yeah.
Of course.
Can I, let me jump in here because, as Richard keeps talking, the word tribe keeps coming to mind for me, because Richard is part of my tribe and you're part of my tribe, Jeff. And, the whole country is tribal, arguably, right now. So I don't mean that in the toxic sense of the word. I'm actually a person who's extremely open to different types of ideas and people and religions and you name it. So I'm not tribal in that regard. But what Richard has taught me, you probably never heard me say this, is, I grew up poor. So in some ways, my entire life, whether it's committing crime or working my way up the nonprofit ladder, was partially driven by never wanting to be poor again, like super hyper driven by the idea that there's no way I'm going to be, mired in a world of poverty the way my parents were and so on. And Richard, as someone who has experienced a considerable amount of wealth, I've heard Richard talk about what makes him happy and what motivates him. And he doesn't talk about that. He talks about like having Korean barbecue with me when I go over to LA. And so it puts things in perspective. It's not that I don't want money. I mean, I'm running a business. I make really good money. Arguably, I make more money now than I've ever made in my entire life. And it just doesn't hold the same weight, and it doesn't hold the same meaning. And Richard is partially responsible for that. Richard and I sort of deepened our relationship at a very, very tough time for me a few years ago. I mean, I left my nonprofit arguably in disgrace. At least that's the way some people would describe it. Sexual scandal and all this other sort of stuff. I would argue it, I think the two of you've been around long enough to know that every storm, has value in it. And it was a storm that I went through, but man, like I would not trade the wisdom I've learned from the last 2.5 years for anything. And that must be hard for people to hear, especially people who knew me, like right when it happened. I was suicidal and stressed out and in huge debt, over almost $1 million in debt, you name it. But I wouldn't trade it for the world at this point. I'm glad to have survived it, and I don't want to minimize what the impact was. But I also learned, if you live by the accolades, then you die by the criticism. And I was living my life surrounded by tens of thousands of people, hanging out with the Kennedys and meeting Obama and hanging out with John Legend and all these other celebrity types. And for me, it was partially about moving the work forward, but also, ego gets involved too. And you start sort of looking in the mirror and attaching your value to your proximity to those people. And now, I still have proximity to those people, but it just doesn't matter the same way. I value them as human beings, but I'm not attaching who they are and their celebrity to my value. I much more prefer attaching and measuring my value by whether I'm surrounded by people like you, Jeff, and you, Richard. So that's something I want people to hear coming out. Like, it's okay to hang out in those prestigious circles, especially if it's like a means to an end or you have genuine relationships with those folks. Mm-hmm. But I wish someone would have pulled my card 20 years ago and said, it's these sort of relationships that are going to be much more valuable, especially when you're going through the storm.
Now, Glenn, it strikes me that December, for you and me at least, is kind of a marker of when we get together. 3 years ago, December was when you had your problems at Just Leadership, as I recall. 2 years ago in December, you came on the radio show with Babs Rawls, Ivy, and I, and talked about it, which was a big deal because you had been kind of coming out of a very dark place.
It was the only interview I did at the time. I was asked to do a ton of interviews.
And then a year ago, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I called you up and since we're talking about restaurants, and we met at this restaurant on Lenox Avenue, I think.
In Harlem, yeah.
In Harlem. And I remember talking to you a year ago about trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the ministry. And you said to me, I just want to tell you, this is very powerful to me because this has never been about money. No one goes into the ministry trying to make money. And you said to me, one, I was doing it all wrong, which I really needed to hear.
Right.
Because my head's in the clouds. I have enough ego to not want to listen to people when I want to do it my way. And two, at that point, your consulting firm was doing well. And you said to me that don't worry about money. You'll do it for me. You'll do it for love. And that really resonated with me. And because I didn't even know I could ask you for that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't feel like I had enough self-worth, even after all this time, to actually tell you I need you, but I can't afford you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you said that. first of all, you're the only two white guys I'll be seen with in public. Second, second of all,
Jeff is very white. Let's make that clear.
It's white collar week.
That's the white collar train behind you. I'm from New York, so that looks like a subway train behind you.
Yeah, it looks like a station almost.
Yeah. And here's the other piece of it, which is, one thing I learned is when I was at the top of my game in the nonprofit space, you become a caricature of your real self. Like, people define you as a thing that has little to do with the reality of who you are as a human being and all the complexities that come with it. And then you can't shake it loose, right? Because people will almost never have the kind of proximity to you that they wish they had. And so they make up a story about you. And sometimes the story glorifies you and makes you into a hero. And sometimes the story demonizes you. I say we all show up as a demon in someone's story. And what that meant for me is when everything hit the fan, people saw a moment of vulnerability and showed their true self and how they really thought about it. And I saw some of the worst come out of people, things that I thought I didn't deserve. Some of it maybe I did deserve. But I also saw the people who cared and stood on their values and how they kept their proximity. And you're two of those people. But one thing I promised myself going forward is I'm always going to make myself vulnerable in front of people so that they don't lionize me and they don't turn me into a hero, because I can't live up to that. I'm not interested in living up to that. That's not the kind of relationships I want in life. And I never want a person to not walk over to me and say, you have something I need and I can't afford it, and can I get it anyhow? Because that's exactly who I am. And so I'm glad you just said it out loud, because it's just a reinforcement for me today that I need to continue to remind people of that. And anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I put it out there all the time. Like, I show my vulnerability very publicly. And this is why I'm saying it out loud right now so that people can hear it. This is why I'm so vulnerable publicly, because I never want to be the hero again, because that is an unfair place to put any human being.
So, Richard, this strikes me as a good place to talk about how you were this super capitalist. Then you go into nonprofits and you you find yourself, or you find parts of yourself anyway. And then you decide that you're going to open up a for-profit, although socially responsible company, but it's going to be for-profit. And I'm sure there had to be a lot in that decision-making, what the structure was going to be, why you were going to do that, how it was going to take, how you were going to present yourself to the world, how it was going to resonate with you, your newfound self. So tell us about 70 million jobs and how you kind of came into that.
I talked about ego before. And, there's something very redemptive and ego shattering about scrubbing toilets for 100 people men in prison. And if that doesn't chop you down to size at least a little bit, you really probably deserve a much longer sentence. Because you really, there's nobody who's a big shot in prison. I don't think John Gotti was a big shot when he was in prison, ultimately. I got out of prison, and, as I said, I had really no idea what to do with my life and where I belonged and who was I. And there was a part of me, I'm sure both of you can relate, because it's a familiar experience. You come out of prison, you lose your best friends. I did. I had my 3 very best friends deserted me flat out, and broke my heart. And it upsets me even to refer to it now, how upsetting that was. And I'm sure it's a function of the fact that I no longer was the good time guy, who could say, let's hop in the jet and go to Vegas and, we're all comped, and we're going to have an incredible time. Or, you have a business idea? I'll fund it, and I'll help you and I'll make it successful for you. I was no longer able to do that. But I got involved with this nonprofit, and, I'm not a nonprofit guy. truth be told. I was constantly saying the wrong things. I was far too aggressive. I, said what was on my mind. And in my experience, nonprofits generally attract nonprofit people. And Glenn is definitely an exception to this, because Glenn is an aggressive businessman more than a nonprofit guy. He found himself in that situation like I did. I used to be rich, and I don't need to be rich, and I definitely don't need to break the law to be rich. I have no interest in that. And I just want to be able to pay the bills and, go out to a nice dinner once in a while is my needs. But I want to make a good living. And I would never, ever be able to do that in the nonprofit world, at least, in my little slice of it. So I also thought that this whole nonprofit approach to reentry was clearly not working, whereby the rate of recidivism is 75%, whereby, the average person out of jail or prison makes $10,500 a year, where 50% are unemployed, where 66% are homeless, where most of them have drug problems and mental health issues, despite the fact that $300 or so billion is spent every year trying to help. It's wasted money. It's not working, clearly. If this were a stock, I used to be in the stock market. If this were a company, you'd be shorting the hell out of it to zero, and then you'd kill it again because it was that bad. I have my theories of why it's that bad, but I just felt with my ego still that I can do better, because frankly, I couldn't do worse. That's really the way, and I continue to believe that, and if I approach it as a for-profit sort of thing, insofar as there are 70 million people with records and no one markets a thing to them directly, nobody except maybe my company on any kind of scale. No bank does, no housing does, no sneaker company does, no mobile phone company does. To me, that doesn't make any sense. They're so missing this seminal business opportunity, I think, and I thought, and I said, something, why the hell not? Give it a shot. What do I have to lose? And that's, and I didn't think that much about it, because I rarely do. I am frequently very, very rash in my decision making, and I always fancy myself as, hey, you're a clever guy, you'll figure it out, and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, but I'm comfortable in that chaos. And that's what part of what makes me a good entrepreneur is I don't need things to be all laid out before I am ready to dive in. So, to me, it was, all right, I need a job. What the hell? I can probably raise some money, with this, and let's see what happens. And again, not much more thought that went into it than that. One thing I do, want to mention, that Glenn was talking about how he sort of wants to own who he is now. People often ask me, do you regret your past? Do you regret things that you did? If you had to do them over, would you have done them over? And, certainly there are things I did that I regret that were just, I'm embarrassed by, I'm ashamed of, yes. But something? The message that I have for the population I work with, and I think Glenn and you, Jeff, probably feel identically, is I'm proud of who I am, and I'm proud of how I did my time. I did it nobly, and when given the opportunity to screw somebody else, I chose not to do it, but rather to say, I'm a man. I accept what I did. I take ownership. And I'm going to get something out of it. Glenn, you went to school and you changed your life. You didn't have to do that. You could have sat around like a lot of people doing nothing, but you chose to use this time rather than letting the time use you, which is a familiar expression in prison. So I don't know that I would do anything differently, really. Because if I did, I'd be a different person now. And, and that means that I'm disavowing who I am now, if I'm willing to sort of delete all the antecedents of that. Yeah. I am who I am because of what I went through. And what my message to my community that I work with is it's time to sort of let go of the shame and bearing that, that stigma. It's your decision. Come out of the shadows and shirk that stigma and take pride of who you went through things. The three of us went through things that people who haven't gone to prison can't even imagine what that was all about. And I really think that we're not given nearly the credit for what that has meant to us and what we bring to the table as a result. People go, weren't you freaked out with the coronavirus? I go, listen, when the FBI is knocking on your door and you've gone through that,
it's true.
You can handle a lot of things, and you discover that within yourself. So
I do believe that the government gave us all early lessons in social distancing and isolation, so that this wasn't much of a freak out. One of the things I was thinking about while you're talking, Richard, is that Reid Hoffman, on his podcast, Masters of Scale, comes back a lot to the point that being an entrepreneur is a lot like jumping off a cliff and assembling the airplane on the way down.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And so, Glenn, now I'm going to Vivian Blackford, who I was doing a project with at the time, called me up and he said, this guy, Glenn Martin, is founding this organization to turn people who've been to prison, who are leaders in some respects, but really don't have leader training or don't really have access to the resources they need in order to be successful. And he just left the Fortune Society. Why don't you give him a call? So I called you. It was kind of a cold call because we hadn't met yet. And I just remember that I wanted to pitch you an idea as opposed to listening to what you were doing. And I've never told you that I still feel embarrassed about that. But what does it take now? Because now you're known in the community. You've raised a lot of money for Fortune Society. So you have a lot of relationships that you have to depend upon in order to launch your own thing. And so people now who are listening to this are either fresh out of prison or they're maybe they're a little bit more advanced, but you have to take the leap into risk.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
So what a lot of people don't know is that I thought I was going to launch an organization 6 years earlier when I left the Legal Action Center. And I met with one of the biggest funders in the field from the Soros Foundation and pitched her on this idea I had, which was different than Just Leadership. It was 6 years earlier. And she looked me square in the face and said, "You're not ready." And I was so pissed. I will never forget how upset I was at the moment. But then I listened and she said, "You should go off and work at another nonprofit and pick up some of the skills you're going to need to be successful as an entrepreneur." And it was difficult to hear it because in my heart, I thought I was ready. I mean, you're talking to a guy that would stake out a jewelry store for a couple of days and then walk out with $500,000. It was hard to tell me I wasn't ready.
Sorry.
But that led to 6 years at the Fortune Society. And, I can be critical about what that experience was like. There were ups, there were downs. But the one thing I can't be critical about is the sort of skills that I picked up under the leadership of other people who had done this nonprofit thing a lot longer than I did. And I knew I could mix my entrepreneurship approach with this nonprofit philanthropic approach and come out of that experience to create something new. And I did. And here's some of the lessons I learned. You can't do anything alone. So let's start there. If people haven't heard that before, let me just make it clear. I mean, leadership can be a lonely place, but that's for another reason. That doesn't mean leaders are doing it alone. They may make it look like they're doing it alone. Some people are that sort of charismatic type A front of the room leader, makes it look like they're doing it alone. I've never done anything alone. In fact, many other people actually did the work. I just got a lot of the credit. But here's the lesson I learned along the way, and I've continued to implement this lesson, which is, you can jump in, you can give it the old college try, if you will, and you can fail, or you can jump in really big and give it the old college try and fail. So why not just go big? Like, go big, or go broke. And it's the same way I was in the streets, and I just decided to apply that. And what I realized is that if you're willing to spend your capital, whatever capital you've built, to hold on to a vision that even other people around you may not see, may not understand, may be critical of, you name it. If you can hold on to it long enough to get at least one other person to say, what if? That's when you know you're onto something. Because it just takes one person to hold on to the vision long enough for other people to start asking, what if? And that was the lesson I learned in building just leadership. I mean, the first thing I did was send out an email while I was sitting on my balcony. I walked away from a job making $180,000 a year to do this into nothingness with a concept paper in my hand. And it said that we were going to cut the number of people under correctional supervision in half by 2030. And it's at a time when the word decarceration wasn't even a word. It wasn't even a thing. And I didn't have a penny in the bank. And I did everything I could on social media to show people a vision of something that looked like a train that was already out of the station. And with social media these days, you can make people believe it's out of the station. And guess what? People want to be on a train that's going down the tracks.
Yeah.
And people started joining me on that journey. And particularly formerly incarcerated people were chomping at the bit for something that felt bold and audacious, for a space that felt like it could be their own. That's part of what's attracted me to Richard's work, is that he's creating a space for us, by us, and for us. And I realized that one other thing, you have to be disciplined. So you have to realize who you are and who you're not, and not engage in mission creep. Like, whatever your focus is and your mission, that's sort of the lane you need to be in. You can, I just built a consulting business and then I built a real estate business. I think people are going to tell the story differently. Oh, he went out and built 2 businesses. It's not what happened. I was hyper focused on one thing and then moved on, and now I'm hyper focused on the next thing. And then the other piece is, people see things play out from far away, and a narrative develops in their head about what happened. And usually it doesn't include the stuff that keeps you up at night. As the leader, as the visionary, there's a lot of that stuff. I really don't want anyone walking out of prison and hearing me talk and thinking it is a straight line. Like, I just want to reinforce that there were many sleepless nights. You have to worry about paying people's salaries. You have to worry about what it's like. Are the funders going to believe in it? Are you going to be able to shape the vision in a way that attracts the funders? Are you going to be able to motivate people to join you? I mean, our first campaign was to shut down Rikers. Talk about, seriously, there's so many things we could have done except try to shut down Rikers.
It's nice you aimed small there, Glenn.
Exactly, but we knew that if we shot for the stars, no matter where we landed, we'd be ahead of the game. And low-hanging fruit, high-hanging fruit became low-hanging fruit. As soon as government officials hear you shooting for something so ambitious, the things they didn't want to let go of just a year earlier become easy for them to hand over. And I do the same thing now. I do the same thing in my consulting business. I do so well in my consulting business now that I employ another 5 people who now work with me. And then in real estate, I mean, I'm shooting for 100 properties in 5 years. I'm about 28 months in. I'm at 19. This stuff picks up momentum. I have no doubt I'm going to get to 100. And then I have some ambitious goals for after that I'm not going to share yet, because I'm still sort of putting them together. But I think the message I want to leave people with is, you might as well go big, especially when you think about our criminal justice system. The more you explain it to people and the more they get it, the more they're intimidated and feel as though they can't play a role in doing anything about it. And we got here through a million cuts. And so it's going to take a lot to get us out of here. So anyone who wants to dig in and do something about it, whether it's on the nonprofit or the for-profit side, I'd urge them to say, like, if you want to get it done in as short a time as possible, go big.
So, Richard, I'm glad the jumping off point there was go big, because you had a big goal here with 70 million jobs, and it was a time in the economy where maybe that kind of vision was possible. It was low unemployment. Technology had come around enough so that you didn't have to actually occupy a physical space with all of these things. There was some seed money out there that might fund this kind of thing. So how do you get to growing in that kind of business? And when we met, when we met in LA, you had just moved from San Francisco to LA. So how do you occupy that space and decide that what you want to be is the premier place for people out of prison to get a job, but maybe even more important, for the big box and the big employers to have a place they could trust to actually get human resources from?
Like Glenn said in his way, I always advise people, and this is just based upon...
It's 4 o'clock.
I tell them it's 4 o'clock. What I have observed in my life is, because people say, you've had such great success, what's the trick, whatever. And I inevitably disappoint them, I think, when I tell them what I think the trick is. The difference between people who have achieved great things and have achieved great success and people who haven't is the people who have dared to be bold about what they were doing and to take the chance. The biggest problem that people have, my company, we went through a program called Y Combinator. So for the people who are familiar with the tech world, that's a big deal, where the top tech companies go through there and learn from the people who are the very, very best globally, who teach you how to build a successful tech company. And you were mentioning Reid Hoffman, who happens to be one of the most well thought of people from the tech world. And he advises that no matter what you do it sooner than you think you should, than you're ready. In other words, just get it out there and take a chance. The market's going to tell you, stop thinking you know the answers. Just grab your you-know-whats and go for it. And like Glenn was referring, it's almost like the lie becomes the truth. As you build assets, and you do it on social media, and you write something and whatever, and then people start paying attention, and then one legitimate thing happens that's good, and then you build on that, and all of a sudden you've got this big thing, and you wonder, how the hell did that happen? It wasn't by planning, but you got to just keep pushing and going forward. And part of that is a comfort in taking a risk. Part of it is a comfort in living in the chaos and the uncertainty. That is where true alpha performance resides. That is where, on the margins, where greatness typically manifests itself. So I believe in take a chance. Okay, that's number one that I tell people. Stop thinking about it. Just do it. It's going to end up differently than you expected anyway, like I said before. And, as long as you're approaching it honestly, with a good heart and good intentions, it'll play out the way it was designed to play out, But you got to just do it. And waiting around for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, "Oh, could you come in here, please? We have this amazing opportunity for you." That's not a great strategy. I tell people, and, I know you wanted to get into this, Jeff, people constantly are coming up to me in my work and they're saying, "Listen, I was fairly successful prior to getting in trouble with the law. Mm-hmm. I don't want to work at McDonald's. Don't tell me that those are should I choose between McDonald's and Burger King? That should be my options. And I say to them, you're right. It shouldn't be. What you should do is, and hear your ego, you're just going to have to face it head on and tell them who's boss. Figure out the industry you'd really love to be in. And it could be the industry you're in, or it could be something new, and reinvent yourself. And find the lowest level job there. You want to be in publishing? Find the lowest job in publishing you can get. Because the lower you go, the less of a risk it is for an employer. They'll take a chance on somebody, even with a record. The high profile things are much harder for them because the optics of it are, the press, the shareholders, whatever. Nobody cares about what a clerk background is. Find the least important job in the industry you want or the company you want, accept it. And in short order, if you are really talented and smart and hardworking, if you're all that, it will manifest itself quickly enough, and you will rise within this organization organically, and you're going to end up where you belong. Plus, it's a lot easier to move from one company to another when you have a record, as opposed to I have a record, I haven't worked for a year and a half, and I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. Take whatever it is. It's easier to do it that way. And that is the piece of advice that I wish I knew, because I thought, well, I'm a home run hitter, right? I'm a big shot, right? And everybody should want to work with me. I'm a distressed asset. You never would have had access to a guy like me before. Now you do. You can get me for cheaper. Instead of paying me $1 million, you'll get me for $500,000.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
guess what? Nobody wanted me at any price. And when I came to understand that, I wasted years trying to push my round peg into a square hole, and you can't do it. You are who you are. Take ownership of it. And then when you go in there, look who's ever interviewing you. And maybe it's somebody who back in the day, you wouldn't have given the time of day. They were some low level, whatever. Be respectful. Look them in the eye. You control the narrative. Tell them exactly what happened. Tell them as a human being, I made a mistake. I paid for it. But I'm looking at you right now and I'm telling you, you give me a chance, you'll never regret it. Now, that doesn't always work, but it works sometimes, and you only need it to work once. But you need a strategy, all right? You can't keep doing it the same way you have and getting no results. Yeah. But I say to people, don't look to hit the home run again. I don't give a shit how big of a big deal you were before. You're not now. And the sooner you recognize that, the better off you're going to be. Go low and quickly move your way up within. And I've seen that strategy really work. Also, if you're not taking a class right now during the coronavirus time, which is a time where it's very, very difficult for anybody to get a job, much less someone with a record, you're really doing yourself a disservice. There are so many ways now to learn to code. Go to Career Karma. They have all these online classes, and they have these things called income share agreements. You don't even have to put up money. They will fund it. And then if and when you get a good job, they'll take money out of that. But in the meantime, you learn a skill, reinvent yourself, take a chance.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
Jeff, in the beginning, you mentioned that I'm doing these real estate webinars. 30 months ago, I knew little to nothing about real estate except for the home that I live in. So I wasn't a real estate investor. In fact, I would argue that the first 6 homes I bought, I wasn't a real estate investor. I made so many mistakes. But when I have people on my monthly webinars now, I can tell who's going to make it and who's not. And the way that I can gauge that is the people who are not going to make it, and I'm 99% certain, and this is usually how it turns out, are the people that are looking for perfection. They're looking for perfect before they allow for the good to move forward. And, Richard just said it, like, it's not going to turn out the way you imagine it anyhow. But if you're waiting to get the right broker, the right agent, the right management company, the right inspector, the right mortgage company, you name it, good luck with that. I mean, 30 months ago, I was under duress and in a huge amount of debt and just had to figure it out, and literally pulled equity out of the one thing I own, my own home, and pulled the trigger and made it happen, and didn't get it perfect, got it wrong, and then continued to get it wrong, but didn't lose my shirt, swam long enough to catch my breath, and created something. And I can tell there are people who have been on my webinars now. I've done 8 of them. There are a couple of people who are on the first, second, and third who already own their first home and are on to their second, third, and fourth. Oh. And then there are other people who join me over and over and actually just have not pulled the trigger. Mm-hmm. And, with all due respect to them, I used to, when I worked in nonprofit, one of the first questions I'd ask people in an interview is, if you had your choice, would you work in corporate America, nonprofit, or government? It actually says a lot about people's appetite for risk. The closer you are to government, the less appetite for risk you have. You want that security. And I still look for that. I look for that in anyone who's asking me to donate my time in them, whether the investment I'm going to make in them is going to translate into entrepreneurship. And one way I gauge that is whether they're willing to just put it all out there and dream big.
Yeah. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. It is said in Silicon Valley.
This is true. That when there was no way in 2002, when I was a Jewish lawyer in New York and tried to kill myself, that I woke up the next morning and I thought, I have a great idea. Let me become a Catholic priest. that
wasn't your plan?
There were a lot of little steps in between. But the story that I tell was, anyone who's watching this knows I decided to go to seminary. That was a very deliberate decision on my part. And for anybody who wants to go into faith or religion or for a career, it's not necessarily a good way to support yourself. And financially, I was lucky because I didn't have that problem. And I was living in Greenwich, but I had when I left seminary, I went to work in this small black church in Bridgeport, and Lynn and I were the only white people in the church. And I wanted to have that experience. I wanted to learn about ministry from the ground up, and what it resonated with the experiences I had in the criminal justice system and in prison. And so I started blogging at night. When blogging was a new thing, I was blogging at night about the crazy part of it, this disparity of living in Greenwich, where like a Maserati is a starter car, and working in Bridgeport. And I would go on the train from Greenwich to Bridgeport, and I was on the other side of the track because all the businessmen were going into the city, and it was packed. There were hundreds of people crammed in, but there were 6 people on the side of the train going from Greenwich to Bridgeport.
The road not taken.
Oh, I'm telling you, it was crazy. And I was with people who were housekeepers and maintenance people, because we were going in the other direction. So I'm blogging about this and just what a mind blower this is. And I got a phone call from a reporter at a hedge fund magazine. And he said to me, are you the minister to hedge funders? And I had never put those things together. The fact that I was working in recovery with all these hedge fund guys, and I was ministering up in Bridgeport, but I never put the two things into one sentence. And he said to me, are you the minister to hedge funders? And I said, no, I never really thought of that. And he said, well, maybe you should be. And we arranged for the interview, and I ran into the kitchen. I said to Lynn, I think our unique proposition has arrived. And one thing I tell everybody, and I'm sure you'll both agree, is that when the opportunity is there, if you don't take it, you don't know if it's ever going to come again. It's just the line is open. You're the running back. Run through the hole. That's it. And you got to be prepared to do that.
So let me build out my real estate story again quickly. People ask me, how did I end up in Savannah, Georgia, which is where the majority of my investments are. And I always start out by saying it's a love story. It's a heartbreaker, but it's a love story. After everything happened in 2017 and I left into unemployment, debt, lawsuit, IRS audit, you name it, divorce, I had just finished buying a second home there in Savannah because the person I loved wanted to live there. And we broke up. I broke up with her because I actually needed to be by myself. Like I knew I wasn't going to dig into my challenges unless there wasn't someone there next to me telling me it was going to be okay. In some ways it was difficult, but I needed to not hear someone telling me it was going to be okay. I needed to hit rock bottom. But I mean, a person could take that and have that be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And for me, it was the opposite. It was opportunity. It was like, you just bought this property, you know the market, you've met a couple people in the market. There's a range of property value amounts in this market, so you can start small and work your way up. And that's the story of not just my life, everyone's. You just have to be willing to look at the storm and say, what have I learned going through that storm that can be valuable for the next step in my life? And so I want to always be careful to not romanticize the success and have people miss where that comes from. I mean, this year in the middle of COVID, I thought it was going to be difficult enough to figure out how to sort of navigate through COVID. I actually ended up writing an article for the New York Daily News about the correlation between time in prison and being stuck at home during COVID. And then when I finally was able to go to the doctor after things opened back up a bit, my doctor tells me that he finds precancerous cells in my prostate. And totally unexpected. Totally. I mean, threw me for a loop. I went from being on social media trying to help other people get through, the pandemic and the quarantine, to starting to wonder how the hell I was going to get through it, and wondering whether this was just going to get worse and worse. And ultimately had to have surgery, which was successful. But I know, even as difficult as that was, I mean, it was months of going to the doctor and engaging in these very invasive procedures before I ultimately had surgery. And the funny thing is, I don't know what the jewel is yet in the experience, right? But I know there is. And I'm actually excited about figuring out what's going to come out of that series of months that were frightening. I just want to be clear. It was like frightening in the middle of isolation. I mean, I live alone, but I'm hopeful. I'm actually hopeful coming out of it, not just because the surgery was a success, but because I know that every time my roller coaster goes down, it goes way the hell back up. And I just want to see where this ride is taking me coming out.
Yeah. I didn't know that, Glenn. So, prayers for you, and we'll put you on the prayer list and all. And thank you for sharing that. So, we're into the last few minutes. Why don't we just go around and just give our takeaways? Richard, I certainly want to give you an opportunity to talk about Commissary Club. So why don't you talk about that? And then maybe a couple of takeaways and how people get in touch with you. Then we'll go back to Glenn, and Glenn, you can give us your takeaway and what your contact information is. All right. So Richard, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. When talking about the bottom falling out, by the end of last year, we really started doing well at 70 million jobs. We were getting thousands of people jobs, and we were actually starting to make money, which was really surprising to a lot of people that we finally achieved this. But then the coronavirus hit, and my business went from soaring to zero literally overnight. And that was just, as Glenn describes, and you describe as well, life just throws you opportunities to, address. It's all in how you address it and what you make of it. I saw that as an opportunity for me to do something that we always dreamed of doing, to take this huge community that we had amassed already and all that we learned, and to sort of double down. And we launched Commissary Club, commissary.club. excuse me, and it is the first social network for people with records, sort of like Facebook for folks who have criminal histories. We continue to work on employment as our sort of tentpole issue, but we're also created an environment where people with records can connect. As we all know, when you come out of prison, you're under supervised release, they're prohibiting you from connecting with other people with records at a time when you desperately need help the most.
Yeah.
You don't have a car, you don't have money, you don't have a job, you don't have a home. And they said, well, you better find all of those things right away. It was hard for the three of us. And, what about the people with little education, little experience? What are their chances? I want to bring them together. I felt like, inspired by Black Lives Matter, particularly where I saw so many people coming together and speaking with one voice and effectively making change occur globally, that the time is right for that to happen with this population too. Enough is enough. So we are connecting them with the goal of providing role models, inspiration, friendship, connections, the hookup, and so that together they can speak in one voice. We have enough people. We could elect any president we want, the three of us. We could. We have together, aggregate buying power. We buy a lot of sneakers and video games and hamburgers and, music and on and on and on. But nobody comes to us because they don't care about us. Well, that ain't right. And we aim to change it. So Commissary Club is a very good place to get a lot of resources that are necessary. But more than that, to connect with people. This is your place. This is our place. Facebook is not ours. Facebook is grandmothers and kids. This is our place to connect, to learn, to have fun, to laugh, to have conversations like the three of us would be having if we weren't on the air right now. So I invite everybody with a record. There is a home for you. It doesn't cost anything to come, commissary.club. And if you want to reach me, richard@commissary.club. I'd love to hear from you.
Richard, thank you. Glenn, what's your contact information and your final thoughts?
Sure. Well, most people would find me on Twitter, honestly, at Glenn E. Martin, GLENNE Martin. Probably the best place to find me. Is where I spend half my time.
At least.
But just something quickly about both businesses and about me and something food for thought for people on the way out. I think of my life as seasons. When everything ended 3 years ago, people were looking for me to find a new way to work my way back into the work. And I kept saying to people, that season is over. I am, you go through spring and then summer, and I sort of feel like I'm at the beginning of autumn as a professional season, as a personal season. Just got my AARP card last week, God damn it. So I'm clear about what season I'm in. And so it means that life is really iterative, and you got to really go with the flow of that iteration. And so Gem Trainers is an opportunity for me to move into that autumn season and recognize that there are younger people in their spring and summer who can actually benefit from the wisdom that I've gained as a nonprofit person for 2 decades. And so people come to me and they come with a vision and they come with a dream and not much infrastructure and no brick and mortar. And I help them turn it into something that they can be proud of at Gem Trainers. So people who are trying to build nonprofits come to me for that sort of guidance. It usually evolves into organizational development, fundraising, but probably the most fun is executive coaching. I get to coach really brilliant people one-on-one. And I've just started taking on some for-profit clients. So I have a couple of for-profit clients that I'm working with now. It's a great evolution of the business, something I never would have thought of 18, 20 months ago when I started. And then the real estate, I really was looking for economic independence, the ability to have passive income. And many other people are, particularly people of color who have never really had the experience of owning an asset that throws off passive income, that allows them to gain some equity. And if people are interested in real estate, I do these once a month webinars. In fact, on December 9th at 7 p.m., having one that is for the beginners, Real Estate 101. I don't know when this is going to air, but they're monthly. And it's a chance for people not just to come on and hear me talk about how I was able to go from $750,000 in debt to owning 19 properties, but they get a chance to ask me questions at the end. And every question is on the table. I tell people, like, I will explain it to you like you're a 5-year-old child, if that's what you're looking for, because honestly, I'm an auditory learner and it's how I learn, for people to explain it to me very basic. So I'd urge people to hit me up on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the same thing, at Glenn E. Martin. And I'm very available. I am nobody's superhero, thank God. I'm very accessible. People should just reach out, take the risk that you did a couple of years ago, and ask me for support. That's what I'm here for.
Glenn, Richard, thank you so much for being on this podcast. You know, you're two of my favorite people. You certainly are emblematic for me of what people should do when they come home from prison: take risks, learn, grow, take it slow sometimes, move faster when the opportunity is there. And thank you for being available to other people who are walking in these shoes, because it could be rough, and we all know that. So thank you, and blessings to you, my friends. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Cool.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on White Collar Week, sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries. You can learn more about us on our website, prisonist.org. That's prisonist, like feminist. And please remember to rate, review, and share this podcast so that families suffering in silence can find us if they need us. See you next time.